can't imagine being dairy-free.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't drink a lot of milk, and I don't eat a lot of cheese, but
milk is in everything.
But just the idea of feeling like I can't have it even if I want to.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that'd be restricting. But for me, pecan pie, hands
Ooh,
down.
that's the worst.
Hands down.
Oh man, I was going pecan pie too.
Yeah. See, now you're waking up.
Oh man.
We agree on one of these food things. So in this last week's sermon, it started off with practical wisdom, anger, and how and not letting ourselves become overrun with it. Even saying to be slow to anger, which isn't that anger is bad,
right?
But that what we do with that anger matters a lot, and that it can be destructive. Yeah. And that then the sermon sort of wrapped up with this simple, but not simplistic, because those are different, but this simple, practical step of asking ourselves what ideas and images we give airtime to.
Yeah.
So there's a recap, free of charge.
Free of charge.
That's it. The sermon could have been that short.
Yeah.
The challenge for this Sunday.
He said it. He said it. So I think, like, last time we talked about, right before the Lunchtime live stream, we talked about anger. In that sermon, you had mentioned, you sort of had this offhand, this sort of like
tangent.
Tangent.
Side note.
Yeah, about righteous anger, and then we had a good conversation about it. And I think it's really worthwhile to just unpack a little bit of that,
Sure.
a little bit of what the things that we had talked about. So I'd love to hear some of that and have it recorded officially.
A question specifically, or just sort of talk about ultimately what righteous anger is, and sort of my thoughts about what I think something about. I don't know that we can necessarily have righteous anger.
Yeah, just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, it was a statement essentially just trying to make a point about not necessarily that I'm right as much as we need to spend some time thinking about that, because in my experience, in my own life, and then certainly growing up in the church, we have this language of righteous anger that I think is justified. I think there is an anger, we were just talking about this. There is, anger is a feeling, God-given feeling in the human being. Anger in itself isn't bad. We talked about anger, and sort of the nature of anger is it's a response, it's a natural response when somebody thwarts my will, when they breach my kingdom, if you would. That's intended, like fear, to be protective. So fear is like fear. I have this response of fear even before I have thoughts about what's actually happening. My body responds with this fear. Anger has a tendency to do the same thing. I mean, I can feel it coming in certain circumstances. Other times it happens, I feel it, and the point becomes then, essentially, to order that, I have to, choose to understand that I've got to engage my will to say, okay, choose what am I going to do with it, as opposed to I instantly respond. That's where it begins to go one path or another. And so the idea of anger then, for it to be ordered, there is the sense of it's intended to say something's wrong, we need to set this right. You think of it in terms of righteousness along those. There's a good response to this that brings about, in the end goal, in our full humanity, Genesis 1 and 2, Jesus as examples, this leads to anger. How do I respond in such a way that brings about what God designed, that brings about good, all things working for good, loving even my enemy in this case? So I'm trying to give some of the same language that we use to understand how to see that through the lens of righteous anger. So the point I was trying to make was that I think it's not that we can't respond with righteous anger as much as I think it's far easier to respond with anger and call it righteous because we know that's possible, because let's just make the assumption we love Jesus, we are intentional followers of Jesus, that it's very easy for us to go to this place as human beings that because I'm a Christian, because I love Jesus, because I believe what Jesus says, then if I get angry over things that I see naturally as not good, then it's righteous anger. And I think that's dangerous because it's dangerous because of the power of anger to be so destructive, which is, again, the main conversation last week and this past Sunday was really trying to make that crystal clear, that Jesus starts with anger because of its universal sort of the struggle universally of that, and the reaction of kind of like the domino that tips over begins to set off all kinds of other time bombs around it, and other kinds of feelings, impulses, desires, so on and so forth. So the statement of, I'm not sure we can actually, that any of our anger can actually be righteous, is coming from a perspective of, because I don't know that I always know my own motives, even in the moment. And so I don't want to lean on the fact that if I'm angry, that there are moments when it is most likely righteous anger. I think it can have, some of that as intent, that we can want to be righteous anger and choose to even in the best of intentions, or anger and think about it and try to respond that way. I think ultimately the Spirit can give us what we need to respond that way. I just feel like for my 2 cents, and that's literally all it's worth, it's best not to believe that I'm capable of that to the degree that Jesus would be.
Yeah.
So and that's the distinction I'm trying to make. When we see Jesus angry, it's always righteous anger because he is fully human. In other words, he's not just responding because he's God's son. He's responding as a man who, in his journey, growing in stature and in favor with God and man, has understood the role of anger in his life enough, and all of the context of his humanity enough, that he is the only one fully capable of responding in the moment with anger, and it literally being the kind of anger that can bring about, and the other party always has a choice in that, so it doesn't automatically bring it, but can bring about a scenario that is good for everybody. And then it's justifiably, without hesitation, righteous anger. The rest of us may or may not get there in any given scenario. So are we capable? Yes. So it was hyperbolic for me to say we can't, because I just don't want us to lean into it because of the danger that it sets us up for if we do. Because I understand, and I've been in the experience of, so I love my mom, but my mom, for much of her, adult Christian life, you guys are probably too young. But Saturday Night Live used to have this character, the church lady. Do you remember seeing the church lady? See, you're too young. So for all of you,
I know the Target lady.
We could probably Google it.
Ultimately was, yeah. So it was this character who, this sweet little old lady, and whenever she sees somebody doing something wrong, she's like, I'm going to pray a little prayer against you. So it was she was just funny. Dana Carvey played her. And so my mom would have this tendency, as much as she loves the Lord and loves people. For example, if she saw, this happened one time, she went into a church with a friend, it wasn't even her church, and there was a teenager sitting in front of her wearing a baseball cap, right? So you're in church and he's wearing a baseball cap. Yeah. So you see where I'm going. So the idea of the church lady is, it's now, she needs to, ultimately tell him he's doing wrong. Nobody's dying here. The kid is in church, so it unable to see that he's in church. And if I say this to him, it might just ruin his worship experience. I don't know his story. Is this his first time? Is he here skeptical already? All those nuances are dismissed in her need from her own habituation to believe that if she's angry about it and because she loves God and God needs our defense, maybe that's not what she's thinking. She did. She said something to him and got onto the kid for for wearing the hat. And so they had this little, quiet, short interchange. That I wasn't there, but from my perspective, probably wasn't helpful, and I seriously doubt it's righteous anger just from the ability to do it. Do I get why my mom did it? Yeah, she wants good for him, she wants to respect where they are, wants him to respect it. I understand all of that. But it's sort of an illustration of, I'm not demonizing my mom, it's saying how easy it is for us to feel like, in this context, this is the right thing, and you need to hear me out. Yeah. And there's context to that story she has no idea about. And the reality is, then, could it bring about what's good for the kid? Yeah. But could it also have gone the other way, south, easy? Yeah. So then it's not fully righteous anger if I'm working in a context that I don't know some details, even my own motive. I don't think mom would have stopped long enough to evaluate why she feels the need to do that. Yeah. So it's sort of all of that.
Yeah. Which reminds me of our intent and our impact. And as you're describing that, there's this level of humility with anger that when you have this level of I have a deep conviction, but I also have humility, it postures me to not power over someone else, where I feel like anger can easily be the thing that I use in my it's justified, it's righteous,
Right.
to then power over someone else,
Right.
which I feel like is not cultivating relationship. And if we are like foundationally, fundamentally our need for relationship with others, relationship with God, in the harmony of those things, I can't be powering over someone else. And so even though my intentions are good, if the impact is that,
Right.
then can I really see that it's righteous?
And yet
in
that's
that way?
nuance. If somebody's
Right.
coming at me or at a loved one with a knife, the fear, the anger in me will want to respond. And so
Right.
I want to power over. But again, the implication is I don't want to let that anger take me over to the point where I want to take their life just because they were wanting to take my life. So it is nuance. But overall, in the context of where this is just dialogue
Right.
and this is just something on the table we disagree about, the goal should never be. Humility is crucial. I think it's a great point in that. Because again, where do I need to die here? All that stuff needs to be going through our mind, but we don't get there automatically. We get there beginning the practice of understanding I have to choose to respond to this in a certain way. Now, what thoughts, images, ideas will I give airtime to in the split second that I'm there? And you begin, and then once it's happened and I'm looking back on it, what thoughts and images and idea am I giving to it now? Because I can keep feeding that and justify it, and then this thing begins to grow from this instant response to something bigger, deeper, more penetrating. So the thoughts, what's happening in my brain in the moment, and then afterwards, when I'm retelling that conversation later on to somebody else because I'm still a little bit amped about it, or am I telling conversation for other motives, that I want to get affirmation that I was right in that, all kinds of things begin to come into play. But it's all of that originates. Wherever it goes, it's going to go one way or the other. It's going to go either I'm going to react in a disordered anger and then begin to try and find ways to justify that or hold on to it, which then begins to go south, which is where it begins to evolve beyond feeling. Or I begin to then lean into it, even if I responded wrong. I immediately, when I have the possibility to step into that and ask with humility, what did I do here that could have done differently because it didn't end the way I wanted it to. And it's going to head south if I don't begin to respond immediately to it. And that then already puts me in a path to allow the Spirit to do its work in me, to teach me, to show me, to grow me. And I begin to put practices then into, maybe in response to that, I just need to make this phone call. We've all been there to say, this didn't feel like it ended well, I need to make this phone call. It comes out of humility, and that's, again, we're all capable of disordered anger, but we don't, the beauty is we don't have to stay there. We can train ourselves to order anger to the point that, again, I've used the example before, that Jesus is on the cross and the last thing that comes out of him is anger. It's simply the offer of forgiveness for everybody. So this just crossed my mind. So maybe it would be an interesting exercise to go back through the passage where Jesus overthrows the table at the temple and read that passage in light of Jesus can only express righteous anger, and see if you can enter into that story to begin to see what looks like might have some tinge of unrighteous anger, knowing that it's not. What might Jesus be doing? And I don't have answers for you. I could draw some conclusions. What might Jesus be doing in what he's doing and how he's doing it in the midst of a context we do have that allows us to begin to understand maybe at a deeper level why this is still righteous anger versus take that at face value and say, well, Jesus got angry, so I have the right to get angry too.
Yeah.
Just an interesting exercise.
Yeah. I think in that you, so on Sunday, but also in that you talked about this sort of arc from these sort of disordered anger moving from like a feeling to a mood to an underlying condition.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get some wisdom from y'all, and I feel like even some of that you already said, even of like the phone call, the circling back,
Right.
But some other like maybe tangible things, that these practices that can help us to identify our feelings, our moods, to put them into proper perspective, into proper place, so that they don't sort of make their way bury down and become underlying conditions. So what are some practical things? Like I think the phone call, the circling back, I think you already said some of that, but are there some other things that either you can think about?
I mean, I'd throw out just at, the very basic one is choose when the next time that there's a moment when your anger surfaces, however that resolves, choose either in the moment, if it comes to you, I believe the Spirit can do that. Maybe you get up tomorrow and say, God, I have potential to be angry today somewhere. And so I want to be aware of the sense of your Spirit with me. If something happens where that's the feeling that surfaces, remind me, give me the will to keep this posture of my will, to lean into and trust that you want to show me how to express that. So, which is just essentially an awareness that I'm capable of disordered anger, and that might be coming from a reality of anger that has already then become so pervasive. It's been in my life. I've fueled it and fed it for so long that I have some inkling that it might actually not just be the feeling. It might be because I tend to be in angry moods. And people have said that to me. People know that about me. I don't like that about myself. Or even further, that I tend to, if I'm really honest, I think, and part of the reason for that, to revisit that anger list that I did on Sunday, was to say these are some pretty simple ways to understand the ways in which anger infiltrates our life, and we either feed it, justify it, or we begin to replace it. That has some pretty simple context along those lines. So ultimately, if I'm walking down the street and I see somebody coming, that's one of those questions in that inventory was that, do you cross the street when you see somebody that you don't want to see or don't like coming alongside? Has to do with patience. How impatient are you? How often are you impatient? Some of that is related to, in some dimension, feelings of anger. I'm in a hurry. I have the right to do this. My will is, if the traffic isn't moving fast enough and I'm getting angry, then ultimately it's a point for me to say, all right, this is related to anger. It's not just, even if I don't feel myself getting angry, if I feed that, it will. And if I commute every day and I'm stuck on Poplar Street 30 minutes, 40 minutes every morning behind somebody, if I'm not aware, I will feed that anger, because that's the enemy's role, is to deceive and say, well, you should be angry about this. People should know better. Why are they working on the streets this time of year? Who doesn't, ultimately, all the simple thoughts and ideas that come naturally to mind, you can feed them or you can replace them. You can call them out for what they are. So, I would say the first thing is then just go into your day aware that you have the capacity for that. And each of us then has the responsibility to invite the Spirit to see to what degree is anger already a natural component of my life. Is it healthy enough? Is it ordered enough where I trust that I'll be more, my usual response will be something that's ordered and relatively healthy? Or if I'm honest with myself, that there are certain individuals or certain circumstances or with a certain regularity, I find that something happened and I may not even yet know what it is, but if I can begin to think about it, I can easily begin to discern, it happens in the context of this, when my kids do this, when my boss brings me in and has this conversation, I feel like those are the places where I just go from 0 to 60 in a heartbeat. Then it is literally so where we start is important, because how you address those will be sort of unique to you. But you can start with the practice of, at the very least, God, as I set my feet on the ground getting out of bed today, thank you for a good night's rest. I today want to begin to understand how to order my anger and understand in all the ways in which I naturally haven't done that. So I'll be sensitive to that. And when your anger surfaces, as soon as you can, sit down and think that through and say, Spirit, help me understand that. And to put some actual, flesh and bone on it. If there's somebody that you trust that knows that they love you well enough to know to give you some feedback on that, then do that.
Yeah. I think that's significant that there's that part of like when something does happen, anger arises, but there's also even before anything happens and anger arises, that at the start of the day to begin that sort of practice, the sort of deconstructing, the weeding, I guess, of the soil of the soul.
Not every time, but plenty of times you got these meetings today, or you got this email, you're going to have this conversation. You can know there's going to be some tension here. There's going to be some clash of kingdoms that can be, if I'm understanding, ultimately all that's going on, I can come at this to the best of my ability with the will to see good from both sides, with the will to want what's best for them as I want for myself. And so I can start there many times, not every time. Sometimes it just happens. They cut you off in traffic and you deal with whatever.
Yeah.
But many times we can. So it's not
Yeah.
always going to be, I'll never know what's going to come.
Right.
So there's plenty of opportunity to say, I can practice this, exercise these muscles of anger ordering intentionally, plenty of times in advance.
Yeah, I think for me, what I hear even in what you guys are saying is this, and it's relevant because my kids have been doing the Kingdom City videos, so that's a plug for Kingdom City. So like on YouTube, we watch these videos together as a family, and it's just as good for me as it is for them.
Yeah.
And this month for preschool and elementary and probably preteen is the practice of gratitude. And so we as a family have been intentional about practicing gratitude, not just on Thanksgiving, but this whole month. And so there's this definition or something that Brene Brown has said is practicing gratitude is how we acknowledge that there is enough and that we are enough. And so when I'm habituating myself into this gratitude, it regularly reminds me of what is good, and that there is enough. And so I think that has been helpful in keeping anger present, like we're talking about, like this isn't a bad feeling, but it keeps it into perspective that my whole decision or whatever conflict I'm in doesn't have to be driven out of anger, but it can be driven from a place of, no, I am grateful for these things, and it helps remind me of that there is enough and that we are enough. And so that has been really relevant this month and really helpful.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's so good. And we don't have much time left, but that I think is so good. And it in the sermon, it was talked about like to live this life with these underlying conditions of faith, hope, love, joy, peace, that we need that Christ gives us the vision for that, and that to live into that kingdom vision, we have to want it, like genuinely want it, not just the idea of it, but we have to genuinely want it, and then we actively have to order and cultivate each of those things: faith, hope, love, joy, peace, and that to replace some of those destructive things with truth. And I have your sermon notes, and so you had a capital T truth.
Yeah.
And then you said that the sort of truth that we are well loved as we are, that there's no need to fear and nothing left to prove.
Yeah.
Which is such a grounding, good reminder. So I was wondering in the next maybe 2 or 3 minutes if the both of you have a story that you can share where that sort of grounding, that reminder of no need to fear, nothing left to prove, loved as you are, well loved as you are, has begun or has deconstructed some of those harmful narratives and ideas, feelings, things like that.
A practice you're asking for?
A story
Story?
A story where that's happened.
Sure.
Yeah.
So what comes to mind for me is several years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I heard that statement. There's no need to fear, nothing left to prove, and I felt sort of like, oh, there's some real weight here of something to pursue, and so I just had that on my mind. And not long after that, I ended up in a very conflictive meeting, several-hour meeting that I didn't know was going to be happening. And as I walked in and sensed that this is going to be really, extremely conflicted right off the bat, made the decision. And I'd also heard Bob Goff talk about ultimately, somewhere I heard him talk, and he was talking about, as an attorney, he would tell his clients that when you go in to give a deposition or go to face essentially the opponent on the other side of the table, he said, sit under the table, put your hands like palm up. Because it becomes this physical representation of what you want your heart posture to be, your will posture to be.
Yeah.
And I truly believe the Spirit brought that to mind that morning, that afternoon, whatever it was, that day. And as the meeting began, I sensed this is going to get really, really destructive. I'll feel very attacked very fast.
Yeah.
And I literally just put my hands like this under my legs so that it wouldn't be a clear, like it wouldn't seem weird. I didn't want there to be distraction to me or to anybody else. But I put my hands under my legs like this to be palms up, basically to set my will to say, God, whatever's here that I need to hear, I want to hear. Whatever it is that is good for everything in this process. That's what I want. And so I'll take whatever comes at me in that sense, trusting that you still will bring good out of this. That's what I want. And so it really gave me the opportunity to sit and say, I don't want anger to be the thing that is. I've got plenty of stories in my life where anger was the instant reaction and lots of regret on the other side of that. But this was too big, and at that point in my life knew if I respond in any way outside of this, then the implications for my life and lots of other ramifications can go south so easy, and it's just what the enemy wants. And so what I need is just to be able to hear, to listen, and whatever I know is coming from you, I'm willing to change, to address, to make right, whatever needs to be done, and the rest I'll let fall off because I'm well loved, because I know that nothing can be said here that will take my life. It could take my reputation. It could take, it could take a life of its own, and essentially, and I've been there before too. But none of that matters if I respond inappropriately. If what I do creates a rift that then encourages or gives space for the enemy or the outcome of this to be destructive. And so I want to hear what I need to hear, and I will do that to the best of my capacity with humility. So the statement that I just kept in my mind that day was, there's no need to fear, nothing left to prove. And for the next few years, kept coming back to that in those moments when I feel like, okay, that we're still working through some of the impact of that one meeting, and I need the reminder that I'm well loved, that no matter what happens, that I have nothing to fear and nothing left to prove. I'm not here to prove anything to anybody. It's not my job, it's not my role. God has already proven that I am lovable as I am, and not because I've arrived as much as just because I'm made in His image and I'm His child. And that for me it's the reason for the series title, that ultimately this is the ground of all things, that I am well loved. And when that can move into my bones to the place that for me, I remember that because it was a conscious decision, and long before I understood sort of how this all plays together in ways that I would communicate it today, it was the Spirit just guiding me to a moment of response. And so without thinking through it as, I need to submit my will, it's just what I felt led to do and did that. And I, from time to time, will still have that practice. It doesn't mean that every time I'm saying like this, I'm expecting anger. It's common pose. But that day for me was an intentional decision because I believed I am well loved, whatever comes. I'm willing to make whatever changes need to be made to bring about what's good, if that's what needs to happen. I'm willing to die in any way that you want me to die, because I trust your goodness. I trust that you love me, no matter what the intent or motive may be from in this meeting. That doesn't matter.
Yeah, the story that comes to mind for me has some similarities. It was I guess to make it tangible, I became a Christian in maybe my sophomore year of high school, and I was a straight A student and really good at soccer. And so those were the two things going for me in high school. And my junior year, I ended up in a knee collision where I tore my ACL. And at that point, I remember really struggling with this, for my parents, the relationship I had with them, all of a sudden, everything felt very conditional, that they only loved me if I had good grades and if I was playing soccer. And to then have this my soccer career is over, I'm not going to be able to go to college. For me in trying to work through and wrestle with learning what is it I actually well loved, or is everything conditioned on that? Are my parents only the only love I can receive from them is conditional. And so it started this work in me of really, I mean, I was angry. I was struggling with feeling anger even at my parents and the relationship I had with them, and even into my college years, really struggling with what does it mean for me to be well loved, not just by them, but also by God, if everything was hinging on how well I was actually doing or how well I was performing. And so I think that those critical years, those first few years of college, having a college ministry that just helped remind me that I am well loved just as I am, whether I'm succeeding or failing. And I think that that's where some of the soil got cultivated for me to be grounded in this well loved regardless. So there's nothing left to fear, nothing to prove kind of attitude that I have to regularly revisit and ensure that I'm not operating in that way. But I think that tangibly for me, it was in those moments where I started to learn, what does it mean for me to be well loved as I am, regardless of what I'm doing or outpouring, and so I can operate in that space.
No, it's great because it's so interwoven, with the narratives and the experience that we have, and yet it gets worked out in the context of relationships that are committed to the same thing that you are. Right. That they don't have to be, foolproof in terms of whether it's parents or peers. They don't have to do it, without flaw. But as long as we're in this journey together, to have a group of people, and I think that's the reminder is all this gets practiced and it's the role of the church is we do this life together and commit to the same pursuit of the eternal life, which is, as we've been talking about now all these weeks, is cultivating these underlying conditions that we see in Jesus' life that are faith, hope, love, joy, and peace. And even if we don't know that, we're pursuing that we're our goal here is to be the hands and feet of God, the literal physical representation of you are loved, you are worthy of God's love. Doesn't mean that you're perfect, doesn't mean you don't screw up. I'm your friend. If I feel like there's something different, I'll tell you. But so when I'm telling you that it's going to be okay, that your worth isn't contingent on your performance, your grades, who you sort of the things that you do or achieve. It's just that who you are and who you're becoming. I think is we have to hear it from people to be able to understand then that this is also the Spirit of God, the will of God being poured into me in ways that I could actually hear it, and the Spirit meets us there to resonate. This is how I feel too. I'm the one organizing this.
And when I started challenging those narratives of my parents only love me if, it really started to undo those lies and started to allow me to experience, oh no, they do love me. They're there for me. I don't have to feel anger at them for not loving me more, but actually challenging those narratives and removing them as the false lies that I was buying into to actually experience the depth of relationship with them. And it was healing for even my own relationship with them. And so I'm grateful, even looking back, that I had people helping me to challenge those narratives and expectations.
And that's part of that process of ordering anger. What you were doing is you were ordering anger. I'm angry at these things. So what's actually happening?
Right.
What's truth? Capital T truth. Jesus says, I am the way, the life, and the truth. What he's saying is essentially, I am ultimate reality. I am that thing that never budges, never moves, is the reality that everything else will clash up against that doesn't line up with it. And so when you're working through the narrative, you're working through what is true here, not capital T, but what's true here. And it gives space for then capital T truth, the Spirit, the words, the presence of Jesus to affirm in you what is true and right, to really take root. And so that's, again, an example of taking captive thoughts is examining those narratives. And I can choose to do that and halt the path, the arc towards anger becoming underlying condition, or I can choose to keep feeding it and not just let the narrative stay here and pretend that this has always been true. And then I will continue on the journey of the cultivation of anger as an underlying condition. And at some point, again, different points in my life, it will emerge, and I might not even know that this is why. It started here because I'm this far down the arc, and I get angry at something this way, and when I stop and think about it, I don't even know why I got that angry, but it's because you never went back to figure out how that anger took a turn in this narrative.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate both of you sharing stories. There was a passage from Ephesians 1, 4 through 5, the version that I thought was beautiful. So, Lindsay, would you sort of read that for us just as almost sort of like a closing prayer, a benediction of sorts for the rest of the day?
Yeah. And God chose us to be his very own, joining us to himself even before he laid the foundation of the universe. Because of his great love, he marked us with his love so that we would be seen as holy in his eyes with an unstained innocence. For it was always in his perfect plan to take us in as his delightful children.
Even you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love. There's no
you
exceptions. No human exceptions to that.
Yeah. Oh, so good. Well, thank you. And thank you all for joining us.
Again.
Thank you.
Join us this Sunday for the series finale of Well Loved. Thanks, y'all.